So again, this session is something that we thought of after discussing about the way people do things in their institutions, and the keyword in the title here is the word future. We would like to gather information about how people are doing their data management today, and make sure that out of these 30 gatherings that we will have, we can really draw some conclusions and recommendations. And again, this is to make sure that the people are aware of how valuable the data they have is, how can they elaborate a kind of data management plan when dealing with their data, and some of the basic things that they have to care about. And here we have to be very, very cautious, because if we start telling them you should do your job like this, well, not only it's unfair, but it's counterproductive. We know that there is some people that have been translating data for ages. They know how to do things, and we should try to share this knowledge across Europe. So it has to be an interactive session with a very short introduction, and the idea is to learn from each other. And the idea is to have someone to moderate the discussion, and the discussion is really how can we design a data management plan to make sure that whatever I do for my documentation production, translation production, etc., would be useful as a language resource for technology. So the idea is, now that I know the value of the data, I would like to do something to make sure that the research community can take it, people who are designing machine translation can take it, etc. And we have a number of steps that we can think of. And you remember my diagram earlier. What there can be taken by a documentation unit, a translation service, and think of what we don't do today, and that can be useful to add. And we have a number of steps here that we would like to elaborate on. We may try to single out a few of them. The first one here in the list is the legal issues. So let me just share with you what I heard from different organizations that we talked to during the few months of the project. There is some people who outsource their translations, and they remain the owner of everything. They send files to the translation services of external service providers. They get the data, they get it in memory, in translation memories format. They get it in the way things should be done. But some cases, people, they get just a PDF file, and they didn't ask whether they own the intermediate steps or intermediate phases of this translation production. It's very surprising, but it's clear that in some cases, the public body is not aware of the translation processes. They are maybe a cabinet of some VIP person. They need to translate something. They don't consult their translation services. They don't consult the documentation services. They may do something wrong. So the idea here is to share all the steps that are done in this world of either documentation production till the translation production from A to Z. And what we would like to insist is, if you do this, please try to have a data management plan in mind. And we can probably, over the workshops, design some generic things coming from the participant. And the important thing here is to see what are the important cycles. When they want to translate something or to draft a report, someone has to think of, well, this might end up being an important resource for language technology. I should specify it in that way. Production, basically, if you are producing translations, make sure that you're producing translation memories that are stored in some platform and that for which you have the right. Validation. Do you design a validation process? Do you make sure that someone is reading, revising, but also taking samples of your translations and making some measures? Try to imagine sharing the data. If you're sharing the data, make sure that you adopt all these public sector rules that would make the data shareable afterwards. And don't forget that the maintenance and the preservation is an issue. It doesn't really make sense that in 5 years we find CDs and we have no CD drivers anymore. And people my age who started with pinching cards and floppy disks today, we still have our programs, but there is no reader for it. And so this is the kind of things that we should try to share with the participants. And again, this should be really interactive so we can learn. And in the reports that will be designed for each country, we will insist on learning from each country about the way they do things so we can share them together. So I think the rest is details. We can go into more sophisticated details if you're talking to people who are really familiar with data. They are familiar with ISO standards, with W3C standards. You can start talking about RDF or linked data and things like that if you feel that this is the right audience. But don't start talking about RDF for some people whom job is to translate documents or to write reports. I think I can stop here and take questions. Yeah, Tamas.
Well, somewhat in the same line as in the previous discussion, I'm beginning to wonder whether we are not seeing things a bit brightly and from our own perspective. Take a public administration workplace where they just fax or send off the data and then have them back. Why would they bother with managing translation memory for themselves? It's, after all, it's not a primary goal for them, hasn't existed so far. They may not be well equipped at all. And I can presume that, at least for some ministries in Hungary, they are not even aware of the value of the text they manage. So they are absolutely unequipped so far in their current practice to be even seeing the importance of text lying about. They serve momentary purposes for them. As soon as that document is translated, job done, they might not need it anymore. So if we target such an environment, can you give us good arguments to motivate them to then suddenly reorganize their thinking about data in the first place and install a practice that so far they were really happily working without?
Well, I think I'm talking in the presence of people like Alain Repos, who has been in this business probably for some decades now. The translation services are aware of the importance of what they do. And if today you see that there are people who are not using, for instance, translation memories, and they do translate a lot, you can question the coherence, the consistency of the translations they have. So if they translate the same report, and hopefully they are not using a single translation agency, they are using competitors, it's clear that none of these agencies will have all the ministry translation memories. And from one agency to another, they would use different vocabulary, different terminology, so different report production. And this is an issue, because as a documentation service, you want to have reports that are using the same terms for the same concept and things like that. So it's important. So it's important for them, it's important for us, because that's what we will get at the end. So if you tell them it wouldn't cost you too much or even nothing if you request the translation to be given back to you as a Word file if you're working with Word, but also as a TMX file, just store it somewhere. You don't have to have the whole environment adapted to that, because later on, when you subcontract the translation of the next report to a competitor, you still have the translation memories, and you can send the report in Hungarian with these translation memories, and then you get the English version plus the new translation memories. So coherence, consistency is important. And also, I'm sure that if you give the report and the translation memories to a translation service provider second time, you may argue that, yeah, you're providing some value, you should get a better price than if you just provide the document to be translated. So it's also financially important for them.
You have the option to save money. Because if you have something in the translation memory that fits the new text to be translated, then and this is proper and due handling of our money, taxpayers' money, which we all are. Of course, I fully agree. Like, there may be cases where it's just beyond and where we can't change anything, and we should definitely not preach or anything like that. That would be totally counterproductive. But I think many of the units are run quite well, especially if they're professional translation units. Sometimes on an ad hoc basis, things may happen. But I think the main point here is to sort of like even at least show colleagues that there are possibilities to systematize data capture and to put in place a pipeline of language data for the EC that maybe assumes a role in Europe to provide these resources, these machine translation systems for all of us, for the citizens, based on the data that we as citizens paid for anyways.
Yeah, and if you, I'm sure that one of the most known translation memory system comes from Hungary, if I'm not mistaken. So we're in a context where a lot of people are aware of that, and I mean, if we're talking to translation services, they will tell us how they are managing the data, and this is what we should spread around, because you have seen it's a very generic presentation, but these people have been doing this business for some time, and they can tell us, yeah, when we subcontract to the translation services, we make sure in the contract that whatever they do, it's our property. So, but we might find cases where some people forget about this, and we have just to tell them this is the steps that you have to try and address before.
May I maybe add something to this? Because in Germany it was actually the case. We had quite a mixed audience. We had almost all ministries represented. So some of the ministries with big translation services, like the Office for Foreign Affairs or similar. Of course, they are more aware of these issues than smaller ministries where only one or maybe two people work. And yeah, the thing is that they're actually just not aware of the value of their data, of what can be done, what could be achieved with them, even in terms of savings, of dealing with the data. And it's just, even if 10 of them say, okay, we still don't want to care in the future, but the couple of others who don't know and who want to care, it's important just to let them know.
Maybe just to add to that, there are often legal requirements that ministries have to document anything that was put in writing at some stage, so that you have a trace, you can trace the chain. And there are quite substantial archival units. And in the old days, this was paper, but of course also ministries are switching more and more to electronic documentation. So we were surprised, like in some cases, this is extremely systematic. There's data capture, there's data warehousing, etc. It doesn't mean that all of this is available. For example, like within the Ministry of the Interior, The Secret Service was maybe less forthcoming in some of the other groups for obvious reasons. But yeah, the potential is there. It's just a lot of it is not visible to us. And you're right, you get the spectrum as well. In other ministries, it's kind of like, yeah, it's more on an ad hoc basis, and you can't blame people for that if it's just once in a while. But we are in an increasingly globalized world. I mean, like if you count the languages here in the room, it's just amazing. And that's happening more and more and more. And technology is going to help in some shape and form, and it's likely to get better rather than worse. And we're making a contribution to that. And we're maybe enabling the EC to step in and adopt a role that in other parts of the world is covered by big commercial operations, by big corporations. And then there are other questions about the data that we supply to them and make available. Maybe this is for Europe a good option.
Well, in the same spirit with what Tamás said, I want to play the devil advocate role. Yeah.
Usually this is my role, but go ahead.
Assuming that people in the ministries, the clients of translation services, would understand the necessity to store and treasure whatever they translate, are you sure that translation services would accept such a processing chain, returning the translation memory they extracted from the translation task? Do you have such an example of a contract that might be a question? Show
you can
where such a thing happened.
Let's add one thing to this. It's interesting discussion about whether the language service provider gives the translation memories back or keeps them. And I kind of agree with Josef's point that it's maybe not a pricing issue. The price is the same, but they would of course like to keep the translation memories because they can lock in. You have to go to them when you want to translate again. Otherwise, if they give you the translation memories, you can go to any other provider. So it gives you the freedom of choice. But that's in the interest of the customer, of course, to avoid the locking in situation as much as you can.
Last question on these aspects, or